I'm Heather, 32 years old, and last month my entire family decided I wasn't worth keeping around. It came in the form of a group message cold-clipped emotionless. We think it's best you step away for now. That was it. No explanation, no phone call, just a digital exile delivered between dinner photos and stock tips. And then my aunt, the same aunt who'd never worked a day in her life but lived off our family's fortune, reacted with a thumbs up emoji. That was the moment something inside me clicked. I typed back calmly, "Understood, I'll respect that, and step away from the family fund too." By midnight, I had closed my contribution, all 4.2 million of it. By sunrise, my phone was a graveyard of missed calls, 89 calls, voicemails. My father's panicked voice repeating one question over and over: "What happened?" The bank flagged everything. I just replied, "I'm honoring your decision." They hadn't realized yet that I was the one who made their empire stand and the one who could quietly make it tremble. Before we go further, let me paint you a picture. My family, the Millers, weren't just any family from Boston. We were the Millers, a name whispered in New England's financial circles with a mix of respect and envy. Our firm, Miller Financial Advisors, had been thriving for 3 generations. My grandfather built it from scratch during the post-war boom. My father expanded it into a regional powerhouse. Our house in Brookline looked like a museum of success. Marble floors, oil paintings, imported furniture, and photos of my parents shaking hands with governors and CEOs. My mother, Diana, was the quintessential corporate wife, always polished, always smiling, sealing multi-million-dollar deals with her famous apple pie. I was the prodigy daughter with a brain too sharp for comfort. While other kids played with dolls, I was reading stock tickers. By 10, I was asking my father about market volatility. Sometimes he didn't even have the answers. He laughed it off back then, but that small imbalance, that subtle threat to his authority, would haunt our relationship forever. I graduated top of my class at Wharton, double major in finance and economics. But when I joined Miller Financial, I wasn't placed in strategy or leadership. My father mentored me by assigning me to my cousin Jake, a man who barely scraped through a state college and thought diversification was a fancy word for confusion. "You need to understand how we do things in the real world," my father said, patting my shoulder like I was still 12. Jake had been there 7 months longer than me. Over the next 8 years, I became the quiet engine behind the company's success. My investment strategies beat market averages by 7 to 9% when most firms celebrated a 2% gain. Clients asked for me by name, but in board meetings, my father took credit for my numbers and told me to smile more when presenting. The family fund, our collective investment pool, was the pride of our name, $12 million managed collectively used for family ventures. My share alone was 35% of it. But I had my own secret, an entirely separate portfolio I'd built since college, quietly compounding while they drank champagne at the Hamptons. Every summer, while they bought yachts, I bought startups. While they chased luxury cars, I chased long-term growth. And while they clinked glasses over family unity, I was building independence disguised as loyalty. Last Thanksgiving, Uncle William raised a toast. "To the Millers, a family where everyone pulls their weight equally." I smiled politely. That quarter, my division alone brought in 62% of company profits. Inside, I made a quiet promise this would be my last holiday pretending to belong. Our monthly family meetings were like mini trials. The mahogany conference room portraits of ancestors, watching my uncles interrupting every 2 minutes. "That's all very technical, Heather. What does your father think?" My mother would pull me aside afterward, whispering, "Honey, men don't like women who sound too smart. Let your father shine." And my Aunt Patricia, the same woman who would later approve my exile, had perfected the art of stealing credit. 3 weeks after I'd presented a detailed European expansion strategy, she proposed, "You know, I think we should expand into Europe." And everyone applauded. Only my cousin Amanda saw what was happening. "They do the same to me," she whispered one afternoon. "They just want me to marry someone useful." Still, I stayed loyal. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I worked harder, they'd see me. By 32, my personal investments had quietly grown to 17 million. I'd bought a brownstone in Back Bay under an LLC, built a home office, and hired my own small team under airtight NDAs. I even patented several financial algorithms, but I never flaunted any of it. I drove a modest car, dressed simply, and kept my head down, believing patience would eventually earn me respect. It didn't. The breaking point came at what seemed like a normal quarterly meeting. I'd prepared a new strategy that could boost high net worth returns by 12%. I'd run simulations, built slides, and projected growth curves that could redefine the firm. Jake strolled in 15 minutes late holding coffee, no notes, no slides. Sorry, I was on the phone with the Donovan account, he said. The Donovan account, my client. I'd asked him to take one call for me while I prepared these numbers. My father grinned. No problem, son. Relationships come first. Why don't you start us off? And just like that, he let Jake take 20 minutes to describe my work as his own. The family nodded along like sheep. When I finally got to present, Uncle Richard cut in. All this sounds too complicated. Clients like simple and reliable. And my aunt chimed in. Exactly. These technical things scare people. I kept calm. Actually, our client surveys show they're asking for more sophistication. The market's changing. My father tapped his pen, his signal for enough. Heather, theory is one thing. We deal in practical realities, I replied evenly. This isn't theory. I've already implemented this on the Westfield portfolio. They've seen 14% returns this quarter. Silence. Then he said coldly, You implemented this without authorization. That's not how we do things. He had told me to do whatever I thought best, but now he couldn't admit it. Jake swooped in again with a simpler idea, basically my plan with all the math removed, and everyone praised his instinct. I just sat there watching my work evaporate under their voices. That evening I overheard my aunt in the hallway. Heather's presentations give me a headache. She uses big words to make us feel stupid. Yeah, my uncle agreed. The girl doesn't understand our culture. Something in me broke. I drove home, sat in my quiet brownstone, and finally allowed myself to see the truth. I would never be respected here. I checked my accounts, my patents, my legal protections. Everything I'd built was airtight, separate, and mine. I wasn't plotting revenge, not yet. I was simply preparing for freedom. A week later, they handed me my exile through a WhatsApp group message. After discussion among senior family members, we think it's best if Heather steps away from client management for now. My uncle Richard replied, Completely agree. My aunt Patricia endorsed. Jake happy to take over her accounts. My mother. We only want what's best for everyone. And just like that, 8 years of loyalty disappeared in a notification thread. I looked at it, all the laughter emojis, the fake sympathy, and typed my final reply. Understood. I'll respect that decision and step away from the family fund too. Then I placed my phone down, turned off notifications, and logged into our financial system. As one of the administrators, I had full access. Within minutes, I withdrew my entire contribution, principal, interest, and my share of profits. $5.9 million. It took exactly 6 clicks. By the time they realized what I'd done, the bank's fraud system would automatically freeze the fund, and the mighty Miller empire would choke on its own arrogance. That night, I made tea, sat by the window, and watched Boston's skyline glow against the dark. I felt grief, yes, but beneath it was something new, relief. For once I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. For once I wasn't the quiet daughter. I was the storm they never saw coming. At first I thought I'd feel regret. Instead I felt silence, the kind that comes when a storm passes and you realize you've survived it. By 7:30 that night my phone began to vibrate non-stop. WhatsApp messages, voicemails, texts, a digital frenzy of panic. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I ordered Thai food, turned on a movie, and allowed myself to enjoy my first peaceful Friday night in years. At 10:47 p.m., my father's call came through his personal ringtone, the same one I'd once jumped to answer. This time I let it ring. He called again and again. On the 4th attempt, I turned off my phone completely and went to bed. When I woke up at dawn, sunlight was streaming across the hardwood floor, and my world was utterly quiet. I turned my phone back on. It took several minutes for all the notifications to load: 64 missed calls, 127 texts, 43 WhatsApp messages, and 17 voicemails. The first voicemail began calmly. Heather, it's Dad. Call me immediately. There must be some mistake. Then another 10 minutes later, Heather, this isn't the way to handle this. Call me back. By 2:15 a.m., the tone had shifted to panic. What happened? The bank froze everything. The funds locked. Heather, please. The last voicemail recorded at 6:30 that morning was different. My father's voice, once booming with authority, now trembled. Heather, I don't understand what's happening. Whatever we did to upset you, this seems extreme. The entire family fund is locked. The bank needs your verification to unfreeze it. Please call me back. Please. I took a sip of my coffee, set the mug down carefully, and typed one calm message. I'm honoring your decision. You asked me to step away, and I have. I've withdrawn my contribution as allowed under Section 7.3 of the Family Fund Agreement. The freeze is standard procedure. I've already submitted my documentation. Then I put my phone down and went about my morning. Within seconds, my father called again. I declined. Another text came through. I ignored it too. Finally, I sent one last message. We can discuss this Monday at 9 a.m. at my home office. The address has been emailed to you. Then I muted every notification, turned off all alerts, and went for a long walk by the river. Boston was unusually quiet that morning. The air smelled like sea salt in early spring. I thought of my grandfather, the man who built everything from nothing, and how he'd probably admired my father's dominance without realizing what kind of silence it demanded from the rest of us. By Saturday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was Sandra, my old college roommate, and coincidentally a senior manager at the bank handling our family fund. She spoke softly, a trace of amusement in her voice. Your family is in full meltdown mode. Your dad's been on the phone with 3 departments. Your uncle tried to storm into the bank president's office, and your aunt's demanding to see the CEO. I exhaled slowly. I'm sorry for the chaos. Sandra chuckled. Don't be. Everything you did was by the book. The freeze is automatic for large withdrawals. You'll be cleared by Monday. Her tone softened. Heather, you're making history over here. I've never seen a family fund implode in such poetic fashion. I laughed, the first genuine laugh in weeks. We hung up and I stared out the window for a long time, letting that word echo in my mind, poetic. By evening, the messages had evolved from outrage to desperation. Uncle Richard. You can't just do this, Heather. This is sabotage. Aunt Patricia. I always said you were too emotional to handle business. Jake. What about the Henderson deal? We're counting on that investment, my mother. Honey, please just talk to us. We can fix this. Please. Their words blurred into background noise. They were realizing piece by piece what I'd always known: they'd built an empire on my back. And without me, their foundation was crumbling. The Henderson deal, the one Jake mentioned, was a $20 million real estate project that depended on the family fund for its down payment. Without my contribution, they were short by millions. And since the account was frozen, they couldn't touch the rest either. Months of planning and prestige gone overnight. Only one message made me smile. Amanda. Good for you. They never saw what you were worth. Coffee next week, I replied. Yes, it was a single word, but it meant everything. That night, a new wave of chaos arrived, not from my family this time, but from clients. My father had made a desperate mistake. He'd given out my personal cell number, telling clients to call me directly about temporary issues with their accounts. That was crossing a line. I spent 2 hours replying calmly to worried clients, reassuring them that their portfolios were untouched, that their funds were separate from the Miller family's internal business. I chose every word carefully, protecting both my reputation and the firm's, even though the firm had just exiled me. By midnight, my phone rang again. This time it was Jonathan, our family attorney. His tone was calm, deliberate. Heather, I've reviewed your withdrawal. Legally, you're within your rights, but this has caused significant strain on the family business. I understand that, I said evenly. He hesitated. Your father asked me to offer terms: the return of your funds, plus a new leadership role within the company. I'm not making any decisions right now, I replied. We'll talk Monday. He paused again, more carefully this time. He also mentioned potential legal action regarding intellectual property and client relationships. I almost laughed. Jonathan. You know, as well as I do, my patents are registered under my name. My contracts are airtight and my algorithms were developed independently. But yes, we can discuss that Monday too. He sighed. For what it's worth, I advised against any legal posturing. I know you did, I said quietly. Good night, Jonathan. On Sunday morning, the tone shifted again. My mother's voicemail came first, tearful, pleading. Heather, please. Family is all we have. Your grandfather would be heartbroken if he saw this. Then Aunt Patricia's long message, dripping with false warmth. I've always admired you, dear. We women should support each other in finance. Uncle Richard followed with the opposite energy. You're overreacting to a simple business decision. Get over your hurt feelings and act like a professional. I deleted all three without responding. Instead, I made coffee and began organizing documents for the Monday meeting: patents, contracts, fund records, proof of compliance, and a quiet resolve sharper than anything I'd ever felt. By 9 p.m., my security system pinged. Someone was at my door. Through the camera, I saw my father, unshaven, wrinkled shirt, eyes red from sleeplessness. The man who once towered over boardrooms now looked smaller, heavier, uncertain. For a long moment, I considered ignoring him. But something, maybe old habit, maybe compassion, made me open the door. We stood in silence. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. The Henderson deal dies at 9 a.m. tomorrow if we don't have the funds. That's $3 million gone. I met his eyes steadily. That sounds like a business problem. Let's handle it like one. 9 a.m. tomorrow, my home office. Bring whoever you need. He blinked, surprised by my tone. Heather. But I didn't let him finish. 9 a.m., Dad. He nodded slowly, defeated. 9 a.m. As he turned to leave, the cold air carried a strange kind of finality. He'd always been the one setting terms. Now, for the first time, he was following mine. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed every meeting where I'd been silenced, every idea that had been stolen, every small humiliation disguised as mentorship. But beneath all that was calm anticipation. Tomorrow, I would stand as their equal or walk away as their superior. At dawn, I prepared my home like a boardroom. I set out coffee, pastries, and 5 neatly labeled folders, one for each family member. For years, they'd made me present in their rooms. Now they would sit in mine. When the security system chimed at 8:30, I checked the monitor. They'd arrived early: my father, Uncle Richard, Aunt Patricia, Jake, and Jonathan. All of them the same faces that had voted me out, now standing on my doorstep. I smiled faintly. For the first time in my life, the playing field was mine. At exactly 8:59 a.m., I opened the door. There they were. My father at the front, Uncle Richard beside him, Aunt Patricia trying to arrange her expression into something polite, Jake scowling behind them, and Jonathan, the family attorney, looking as though he wished he were anywhere else. They filed into my brownstone slowly, their eyes darting over the high ceilings, the art on the walls, the quiet luxury of the place. None of them had ever been inside my home before. I could feel their silent recalibration as they took in the reality that I had built a life and wealth far beyond what they had imagined. "The dining room's set up," I said evenly, leading them down the hallway. The table was arranged like a boardroom, 6 seats each with a folder, a pen, and a cup of steaming coffee. I stood at the head of the table. My father noticed and hesitated for half a second before sitting to my right. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the espresso machine in the kitchen. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Heather, we're here to resolve this situation quickly. The Henderson deal." I raised my hand, palm open, a gesture he had used on me for years to silence my input. "Before we talk about any specific deals, we need to address the bigger issue." He blinked in surprise but said nothing. "I've withdrawn my contribution from the family fund. That's my right under the partnership agreement. The bank has already confirmed the transaction's legitimacy. The freeze will be lifted by noon." Uncle Richard's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. You're holding your own family hostage over a bruised ego." I met his gaze calmly. "This isn't about ego, it's about value and respect. I've generated over 60% of this company's profits for the last 8 years, yet I was dismissed from client management with a group text message. No explanation, no discussion, just silence." Aunt Patricia leaned forward, her voice syrupy. "Oh, honey, that wasn't meant to be personal. We just needed to make decisions quickly before the retreat." I tilted my head slightly. "The retreat I wasn't invited to." Her smile faltered. My father jumped in. "That was a miscommunication. We were planning to clarify everything there." Jake snorted. "Come on, Heather. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. So your feelings got hurt, you didn't have to blow up a major deal over it." I turned to him, voice steady. "I didn't blow up anything. I simply withdrew my own money. The fact that my withdrawal crippled the fund says more about how dependent you've all become on my contributions." He opened his mouth to reply, but Jonathan spoke first. "Perhaps we can focus on immediate solutions before long-term issues. The Henderson deadline is in a few hours." I nodded. "Agreed. I'm prepared to wire $5 million to the family fund this morning, enough to cover the down payment and secure the deal." A flicker of relief crossed their faces until I continued. "However, this transfer will be structured as a loan from my personal holdings to the family fund with standard market interest and clear repayment terms. The air shifted instantly. My father frowned. A loan. You're going to charge your own family interest. This is a business transaction, I said softly. You've always insisted we treat everything that way. I'm following your example, and I'm offering better terms than any commercial lender would under these time constraints. Jonathan nodded reluctantly. She's correct. Legally and financially, this is a fair proposal. Uncle Richard slammed his palm against the table. This is extortion. No, I replied evenly. This is negotiation. The alternative is letting the Henderson deal collapse. Silence filled the room, heavy and unfamiliar. My father looked at me with something between pride and disbelief. I could almost see the calculations behind his eyes, ego versus survival, pride versus pragmatism. After a long pause, he exhaled slowly. Fine, Jonathan, draft the loan agreement. I didn't move. Before we do that, there's something else. What now? Jake muttered. My involvement with Miller Financial and the family fund will require a completely new agreement. One that defines my authority, my ownership stake, and my autonomy moving forward. Aunt Patricia gave a condescending laugh. Heather, dear, I know you're upset, but surely you're not trying to renegotiate the entire structure of the business over one disagreement. I'm not upset, I said quietly. I'm clear. For years, you've minimized my work, ignored my results, and taken credit for what I've built. That ends today. The stillness after those words was profound. Even my father didn't interrupt. Finally, Jake scoffed, crossing his arms. Let's be real. You need the Miller name and connections as much as we need your number crunching. Where do you think you'd even go? That was the opening I'd been waiting for. I smiled faintly. I'm glad you asked. I pressed a small remote. The television on the wall flickered to life. On screen appeared a logo, Heather Miller Capital Management. Gasps around the table. I've been operating my own investment firm for the past 4 years, I said calmly, advancing the slides. Charts appeared, growth curves, client returns, performance metrics. Our average client returns are 17% annually compared to Miller Financial's 9%. My father's voice shook slightly. That's impossible. You've been working full-time for us. Evenings, weekends, and every vacation I never took, I said. While you were at the lake house, I was building something of my own. Uncle Richard's face turned crimson. That's a violation of your employment contract. You can't compete with us. I slid a document across the table to Jonathan. Clause 4.2 of my agreement allows personal investment activity as long as I don't directly solicit Miller clients. I haven't. Everything I've done is fully compliant. Jonathan reviewed the document, his expression tightening. She's correct. The language is broad enough to cover this. I advanced the next slide, patent certificates. I also own 7 patents for financial algorithms and trading systems registered in my name, not the firm's. You developed those while working for us, my father objected weakly. On my own time, with my own resources. Every file, every timestamp is documented, you can check. Then came the next slide, client lists. I currently manage 27 high net worth clients, none of whom are tied to Miller Financial. A stunned silence settled over the room. Furthermore, I continued, 17 existing Miller clients have personal service clauses in their contracts, meaning if I leave, they can choose to follow me. Jonathan looked uneasy as he skimmed the documents I handed him. These clauses are legitimate. Many high-end clients insist on them. They're enforceable. My father's eyes widened. How much in assets does that represent? Approximately 230 million, I replied softly. The words hit like a hammer. My aunt's polished composure cracked. When did you plan all this? I didn't plan it as revenge, I said. I built it because I realized long ago that no matter what I achieved, I'd never be respected in your system. This wasn't sabotage, it was self-preservation. I showed one final slide, a comparison of my firm's results versus Miller Financial's performance. The difference was staggering. I'm not showing you this to humiliate anyone, I said, voice softer now. I'm showing you that I've earned the right to be treated as an equal. My results speak for themselves. My father stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw it in his eyes, respect tinged with regret. What do you want, Heather? He asked quietly. 3 things, I said. First, we finalize the loan for the Henderson deal today. Second, I take a 1-month leave to give everyone time to decide what comes next. Third, we reconvene in 30 days to determine whether I return under new terms or formally separate my business from yours. Jonathan nodded slowly. These are fair conditions. My father hesitated, then said the words I never expected to hear. We accept your terms. Jake started to protest, but my father silenced him with a raised hand. Enough, Jake, the situation has changed. Within an hour, the loan documents were drafted and signed. I transferred the funds immediately. The Henderson deal was saved. As the others gathered their things, my father lingered. He looked around my home with quiet awe, taking in everything he'd never known about me. I underestimated you, he said at last. I've been doing it your whole life, haven't I? I met his eyes. The next family meeting will be our fresh start or our final one. He nodded, looking older, softer. Your grandfather would have been impressed, he murmured. He valued results above everything. When the door finally closed behind them, I stood in the stillness of my living room, surrounded by the scent of coffee and paper. For years, I had begged for recognition. Now I'd claimed it without asking. The following weeks passed faster than I'd imagined. For the first time in years, I wasn't chained to the constant hum of Miller Financial's demands. The endless family meetings, the subtle dismissals, the polite condescension, it all faded into a distant echo. During my 1-month leave, I threw myself into my independent firm full-time. My team, small but fiercely loyal, helped refine our client strategies and prepare for every possible outcome of the next family meeting. Whether they offered partnership or forced separation, I would be ready. But it wasn't all business. For once, I let myself live. I took weekend hikes in the White Mountains. I reconnected with old college friends I hadn't seen in years. I even started dating again, a quiet dinner here, a long conversation there. Simple things that used to feel impossible when I was constantly proving my worth. And yet in the quiet moments I still thought about my father, about how exhausted he had looked that morning in my doorway, and about the flicker of pride in his eyes when he finally saw me for who I was. Amanda and I met for coffee several times during that month. Away from the suffocating hierarchy of the family, she seemed lighter. Watching you stand up to them gave me courage, she told me one morning. She smiled shyly and admitted I've started interviewing at architecture firms again. I never wanted to work in marketing. I smiled back. You'll be brilliant. Don't let them convince you to shrink again. They'll try, she said softly, but I've seen what's possible now. It was the kind of small victory that reminded me why I had done all this, not just for respect, but for freedom, for the quiet revolution that happens when one person refuses to play small. Jonathan sent me periodic updates about the family business. The Henderson deal had gone through successfully thanks to the loan. The firm's reputation was intact, and in fact, some of my past strategies were now being implemented by my father with noticeably better results. Slowly, I began to sense the shift. The same family that had once dismissed my ideas was now running on them, and that gave me leverage not just on paper but in spirit. When the 30 days ended, the new meeting was scheduled not in my home this time, but in a private dining room at a Boston restaurant. I'd chosen the location deliberately. Neutral ground. No mahogany panels, no ancestral portraits. Just a simple round table symbolizing equality. I arrived early as always. The table was set with linen napkin silverware that gleamed under the warm light, and a quiet air of anticipation. One by one they arrived. My father looked more composed this time, still cautious but steady. Uncle Richard was subdued, his arrogance tempered by the last month's reality check. Aunt Patricia wore her usual pearls, but none of her usual smugness. Jake followed behind them, his bravado replaced by what looked like discomfort. Jonathan entered last, carrying a leather folder. Then unexpectedly my mother walked in her presence, surprising everyone. She had rarely attended business meetings, preferring to stay above the fray. But there she was, elegant as ever, yet softer around the eyes. And walking beside her, Amanda. Amanda met my gaze briefly and smiled, that small conspiratorial smile that said, "You're not alone anymore." We all took our seats. The room felt different this time, not as a courtroom, but as a crossroads. My father began. Heather, over the past month, we've had time to reflect on everything that's happened. The family and the company have benefited from your contributions in ways we didn't fully recognize. He gestured to Jonathan, who distributed folders to everyone. We'd like to propose a new arrangement, one that acknowledges your value while preserving the family legacy. I opened the folder. Inside was a formal restructuring plan for Miller Financial Advisors. We're proposing the creation of a new division, my father said. Miller Capital Management, with you as president and CEO. You'll have full autonomy over investment strategies, staffing, and client management. Your compensation will be tied directly to your division's performance, not to the family pool. I scanned the document in silence. It was more generous than I expected and far more progressive than anything the Millers had ever agreed on. My father continued. We're also restructuring the family fund. From now on, voting power will be proportional to contributions, not equal shares for everyone. Those who invest more will have more say. I looked up sharply. That clause alone was a revolution. It erased decades of inherited entitlement. What about my independent firm? I asked. Jonathan answered. The proposal includes a merger. Your patents, clients, and intellectual property will be incorporated into the new division with your full ownership protections. Your personal client contracts will remain valid under your leadership. It was thorough, clearly something they'd worked on extensively. And leadership succession, I pressed. Who decides that in the future? My father's answer came quickly, almost rehearsed. Leadership transitions will be based on merit and results, not seniority. No more automatic inheritance. We'll measure performance and client satisfaction objectively. The room was still as his words hung in the air. Even Uncle Richard seemed to shrink a little, as if realizing the dynasty he'd relied on to keep him powerful was finally shifting beneath his feet. I'll need time to review this, I said carefully. Of course, my father replied. We're not asking for an immediate decision. We want to do this right. Then, to my shock, Uncle Richard spoke. His tone was gruff, but there was sincerity beneath it. Heather, I've been hard on you. I didn't understand your methods, but the results don't lie. I was wrong to resist change. Aunt Patricia nodded slowly. The firm needs your vision, Heather. You've proven that beyond question. Jake's jaw tightened. For a moment I thought he'd stay silent, but then he muttered, I've reviewed your client strategies. They're smarter than I realized. You think 10 steps ahead. That was as close to an apology as I'd ever get from him. And then something unexpected happened. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her voice trembled slightly. You've always been strong, Heather. I just wish I'd told you that sooner. For a moment I couldn't speak. All I could do was nod. I appreciate that, I said quietly. And I appreciate all of you taking the time to rethink what this could look like. I'll review the proposal and respond within a week. The meeting ended with polite handshakes, and as we stood, Amanda gave me a quick, proud smile. The room felt lighter, as if decades of tension had begun to dissolve. That night I took the folder home and read every word under the soft glow of my desk lamp. They had listened. For the first time, they had truly listened. But I didn't say yes immediately. I spent the next few days reviewing every clause with my team and an independent attorney. We refined details, protection for my patents, clear lines of command, defined voting ratios. When everything was in place, I signed. The transition wasn't perfect, of course. Family habits are hard to break. My father still sometimes tried to override my decisions out of instinct. Jake occasionally took credit for ideas he didn't fully understand. Aunt Patricia couldn't help her small, undermining comments. But now there were systems in place and I had the authority to enforce them. Over the following year, Miller Capital Management outperformed every other division. Clients were thrilled with the innovation and transparency we introduced. Investors praised our structure. Even industry publications started referring to our division as the future face of Miller Financial. And for the first time, I felt pride, not the hollow pride of carrying a family name, but the real kind born from earning everything on my own terms. One evening, nearly a year after the WhatsApp message that started it all, I was in the office with my father reviewing quarterly results. He looked up from the reports, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. I've been thinking about your grandfather, he said quietly. When he handed the business to me, he told me something I didn't understand back then. He said, the best legacy isn't preservation, it's evolution. He paused, then smiled faintly. I think I finally understand what he meant. I smiled back. Evolution is harder than preservation. It means admitting that the original design wasn't perfect. He nodded slowly. Pride makes that hard. I was so busy protecting what he built that I stopped seeing what it could become. You showed me that, Heather. And for the first time, his voice held no defensiveness, only respect. It's never too late to evolve, I said softly. He smiled, eyes glistening. No, it isn't. That night, after he left, I stood alone in the office looking out at the lights of Boston. The reflection in the glass wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. It was a woman who had learned the hardest truth of all, that sometimes you have to lose everything familiar to reclaim yourself. I had fought not to destroy my family, but to redefine what it meant to belong. And in doing so, I'd built something stronger than legacy integrity. When the restructuring took full effect, it was as if the entire Miller dynasty took a collective breath, uncertain but awake. For decades, our family business had been a monument to tradition, a closed loop of hierarchy and habit. Now that loop had cracked open, and through that crack light began to pour in. Within months, the impact of Miller Capital Management rippled through the entire firm. Clients who had once considered leaving returned. Younger analysts and associates started to approach me directly for mentorship, eager to learn the new way: transparent, data-driven, merit-based. For the first time, innovation wasn't punished in our family. It was celebrated. Even my father began to change in subtle ways. He no longer dismissed data as theory. He stopped calling every meeting himself and began asking me to co-lead them. And though old habits sometimes peeked through a reflexive correction, here a possessive tone there, I could tell he was trying. The same man who once told me to let the men feel important now paused before speaking when I presented. That small hesitation, that quiet moment of listening, meant more to me than any apology ever could. One afternoon, Amanda dropped by my office radiant. She had finally left the company to start her own design firm. I'd invested a small seed fund to help her get started. She threw her arms around me and laughed. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when anyone in this family could build something without asking permission." I smiled. "Maybe that's the real inheritance: freedom." She grinned. "If that's true, then you're the first Miller who actually passed something worth keeping." Her words stayed with me long after she left. A year after that fateful message, "We think it's best you step away for now." We hosted the company's annual meeting. Only this time, I stood center stage beside my father. Not behind him, not beside Jake, not half hidden behind family names or shared credit. The banner above us read, "Miller Financial Advisors, a legacy reimagined." When my father introduced me as president and CEO of Miller Capital Management, the applause that followed wasn't polite, it was thunderous. Even the employees who had once whispered doubts about me now looked on with genuine admiration. It wasn't revenge I felt. It wasn't triumph either. It was something quieter, cleaner: vindication without venom. After the event, my father approached me as the crowd dispersed. His voice was low but sincere. "Your grandfather would have been proud of you, and so am I." I studied him for a moment. "You finally see me, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "I always saw you, Heather. I just didn't understand you, and that's my failure, not yours." I smiled faintly. "Then let's call it growth." He chuckled softly, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. "Growth," he repeated. "That's a good word for it." In the months that followed, our professional relationship found its rhythm. He stepped back gradually, letting me take the lead. Jake was reassigned to a smaller division where he could actually learn humbly this time. Aunt Patricia joined a philanthropic board, finally doing something useful for once. And Uncle Richard, well, he still grumbled at meetings, but even he learned to read the room before interrupting. The real surprise was my mother. Freed from the role of peacemaker, she began to volunteer at financial literacy programs for women, using her connections to help others build independence. One evening, she called me after one of her workshops. "I finally understand what drove you all these years," she said softly. "It wasn't ambition. It was freedom." I closed my eyes, tears pricking behind them. "You understand now?" "Yes," she whispered. "And I wish I had understood sooner." That was all I needed. Sometimes I look back on the night it all began. The group message, the thumbs up emoji, the shock of realizing I'd been erased. It should have broken me, but instead it became my beginning. Life has a way of forcing clarity when you least expect it. Sometimes the people who underestimate you aren't your enemies, they're your teachers. They push you to build quietly, to prepare in secret, until the moment you no longer need their permission to rise. My story isn't about revenge. It's about awakening. It's about what happens when the girl who's always been told to wait her turn finally decides she's done waiting. The Millers learned their lesson not through punishment, but through consequence. They lost their certainty, and I gained something far greater: peace. Now when I walk into the office, I don't shrink to fit. I take up space comfortably, unapologetically, fully aware of my worth. And every time a young analyst, especially a woman, approaches me nervously to ask for advice, I tell her the same thing I wish someone had told me years ago: you don't have to wait for permission to become who you already are. And to you watching this right now, maybe you've been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. Maybe your worth has been questioned by people who can't even see their own reflection clearly. Don't waste your life trying to convince them. Build quietly, prepare in silence, and when the time comes, stand tall, speak clearly, and let the truth of your value echo louder than their doubts ever did. Because respect isn't given, it's claimed through courage, boundaries, and the refusal to shrink for anyone. If this story touched you, take a moment to share, and subscribe for more stories about strength, family, and finding your voice. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever had to take a stand to make someone finally see your worth? Your story might be the reminder someone else needs today. Thank you for listening, and never forget. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply honor your own value even when others can't yet see it.